Rome, the city of marble, the empire of law, power, and ambition. But step away from the glowing temples and the roar of the Senate, and you'll find a quieter economy, one that thrived in the shadows. Here, in the crowded squares near the Tiber, a very different kind of transaction unfolded. Men with heavy purses walked among rows of human lives, buying not just workers for farms or gladiators for the arena, but something far more exclusive. Boys selected for their beauty, their refinement, their potential to serve in Rome's most private spaces. To the Roman elite, these boys were not children. They were status symbols, pieces of living luxury, no different from the ivory couches in their villas or the exotic wines in their cellars. Juvenal, the sharp-tongued satirist of the age, once sneered that a boy with perfect curls costs more than a farm, and in that single line he exposed the dark paradox of Roman greatness, a civilization that celebrated law and order while openly trading human lives as if they were objects. Imagine it, a boy, maybe 12, maybe 14, standing on a raised platform in the Forum Boreum. The sun is merciless, the crowd restless. Around his neck hangs a wooden placard, name, age, origin, price, like a label on a jar in the marketplace. He doesn't understand Latin, not fully. His ears are filled with the noise of traders calling out bids, their voices sharp and casual, as if this is nothing more than a grain auction. And in a way, it isn't, not to them. Most of these boys came from far beyond Rome. Some were captured in war, pulled from burned-out villages in Thrace or Cappadocia. Others were sold by desperate families, convinced that a wealthy Roman household meant food and safety. For the buyers, it wasn't just about appearance. Elegance was currency in Rome, and refinement, a graceful walk, delicate manners, even the shape of a smile, could double or triple the price. To own such a boy wasn't just ownership, it was proof of power, wealth, and status. Once the deal was done, the boy's name often disappeared. He became a possession, rebranded to fit the house he now served. In the ledgers, he was listed with the rest of the inventory, alongside the silver, the tapestries, the wine. Inside the grand villas of Rome's elite, life was nothing like the chaotic markets where it began. Here, the air smelled of incense and polished marble. The halls echoed with poetry recitals, quiet conversations, and the soft footsteps of those who knew better than to disturb the stillness. For these boys, silence became survival. Every movement, every glance, was trained and rehearsed. They learned to pour wine without spilling a drop, to stand perfectly still during long banquets, to anticipate a command before it was spoken. To outsiders, their world might have seemed enviable: fine clothing, rich food, proximity to Rome's most powerful men. But behind the silk and luxury was a life of relentless control. Every hour of the day was accounted for: grooming, lessons, service, and above all, obedience. Even their emotions were not their own. Joy, fear, anger, none of it could show. A misplaced look, a slow response, could mean punishment. And punishment in these houses was swift, quiet, and unquestioned. They were living ornaments in a city obsessed with appearances, admired in public, but invisible as people. The deeper you went into Rome's hierarchy, the darker the reality became. For the most valued boys, service in a senator's home was only the beginning. The ultimate destination, and the most dangerous, was the imperial palace itself. Inside the Palatine Hill, luxury reached impossible heights. Marble halls stretched endlessly, draped with silk and guarded by soldiers whose loyalty was absolute. But behind the wealth was a chilling truth. Here, ownership wasn't enough. Control had to be absolute. The imperial household was a world of silence and ritual, where even a whisper could be fatal. Those chosen to serve the emperor were stripped of every trace of their former lives. They were trained to move like shadows, perfect, precise, and unerring. Rome, for all its laws and virtues, had a system that institutionalized dominance. These boys weren't just property, they were symbols. Their presence was a constant reminder of the emperor's reach, a living demonstration that power could bend anyone, from the highest senator to the humblest captive. And the system wasn't hidden. Everyone in Rome knew, no one questioned it. Rome loved its laws. They were etched into stone, recited in forums, celebrated as the backbone of civilization. But when it came to power, laws bent, or vanished. Technically, certain practices were forbidden. In theory, the empire condemned extremes of control within elite households. In reality, money and influence rewrote the rules. Inside the marble walls, what happened was never spoken of openly. There were no witnesses, no written records, only fragments left behind in the works of poets and satirists. Tacitus, Juvenal, Martial. They hinted, they mocked, but they never named names. To do so was dangerous. Those closest to the heart of power lived in constant contradiction. To the world, they were polished ornaments of the imperial court. Behind closed doors, they were trapped in a cage of wealth and fear, where stepping out of line could mean disappearance, not in days or weeks, but in a single quiet night. And perhaps that was the greatest cruelty of Rome's grandeur, a civilization that believed beauty and elegance justified control, that luxury excused the silence of those it consumed. Among the countless unnamed boys, one story still survives, a ghost from the reign of Nero. His name was Sporus, or at least that's the name history gave him. His real name, the one his parents whispered when he was a child, is lost to time. Sporus was young, quiet, and striking, the kind of boy the imperial court noticed. Nero, ever hungry for control and spectacle, brought him into his private circle. What followed blurred the line between possession and performance. Ancient sources say Nero paraded Sporus through Rome, dressed in fine garments, introduced him at public events, and even staged a ceremony where he referred to him as a bride. It wasn't affection, it was power as theater, domination disguised as grandeur. To the public, Sporus was a curiosity, a living symbol of the emperor's unchecked reach. To those inside the palace, his story was a warning. In Rome, beauty could elevate you to marble halls, but it could also strip you of everything that made you human. And when Nero fell, Sporus vanished from the record. His name lingers in a handful of lines written by historians, but the boy himself, the person behind the story, disappeared into the silence that Rome demanded. Rome loved to disguise cruelty in elegance. From the outside, the boys who served in these marble halls seemed blessed, living amid wealth, surrounded by art, draped in silk. But the reality was far from the illusion. Every smile they showed at banquets, every graceful movement in the emperor's presence was a performance scripted by fear. They were trained to glide across polished marble floors, to refill goblets without a ripple, to stand motionless for hours while power moved around them. Their silence wasn't just expected, it was demanded. Even a misplaced glance could bring humiliation or worse. To survive, they learned to read the smallest shifts in expression, to anticipate moods before words were spoken. In a palace where one raised eyebrow could end a life, this ability became their only shield. To the elite, these boys were status made flesh. To host a gathering without them was unthinkable. Their presence turned ordinary dinners into performances of power. Guests whispered their admiration, noting the flawless service, the beauty, the discipline, but no one wondered what it took to maintain that facade. And here lies the cruel paradox. The closer they stood to the heart of the empire, the more invisible they became. They could be in the same room as emperors, poets, and generals, men whose decisions shaped the world, and yet remain utterly voiceless. Even Rome's philosophers, men who questioned the morality of war and wealth, rarely spoke of them. The poets immortalized their beauty but ignored their suffering. To speak their names was to acknowledge that Rome's grandeur rested on a quiet foundation of control, and so the illusion endured. Luxury without consequence, power without guilt. History remembers Rome for its triumphs, its roads, its legions, its art and law. But in the quiet spaces where no marble arches stand, there are stories we barely hear. Stories of boys whose names never made it into the records, whose lives were reduced to whispers between the lines of ancient texts. Imagine the forum at dawn, merchants setting up their stalls, senators hurrying to meetings, and somewhere in the crowd, one of these boys, older now but still silent, carrying the weight of years spent in service, a living shadow among monuments built to celebrate everyone but him. Their existence reminds us of a truth that civilizations often hide: power feeds on silence. Rome wrapped its cruelty in grandeur, masking control with beauty, until the two became indistinguishable. When the empire fell, its marble crumbled, its roads cracked, and its temples turned to ruins. But their stories, their pain, their resilience didn't survive. They vanished with the ashes, leaving only faint echoes in the words of satirists and historians who hinted but never dared to tell the full truth. The irony is almost poetic. The empire that sought to immortalize itself in stone erased the very lives that stood closest to its power. And maybe that's the most haunting part. Not that these boys were forgotten, but that they were never truly seen to begin with. Look around today, and you'll see the same patterns repeated in different forms. The names change, the settings change, but the machinery of power and its hunger for control remains. So, as we study Rome, as we marvel at its roads and its aqueducts, as we trace the outlines of its fallen empire, we're left with a question that lingers like a shadow over history. Quis custodiet ipsos custodes? Who will guard the guards themselves? Because history may change, but the silence of those beneath power and the danger of ignoring it never truly disappears.